What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from Zoom again. It is time to put up your metal horns and your middle fingers because we return with the almighty Overkill with Bobby Blitz. Great to be able to speak with you, man. Thanks for being here.
Alex, my pleasure, man. It's good to be anywhere at my age, as Lemmy used to say.
Yeah, right? It's funny you mentioned that because you still have the #1 line said in any interview in the history of this channel. What do you have to say of people, young musicians who take inspiration from Overkill? Move out of the way, kid. I ain't done yet. So.
Listen, I'm not trying to cause any trouble. I'm not that kind of guy. I got a funny sidebar to that. Dee Dee's has two girls, and they grew up knowing the road. And I used to say on stage when I was trying to incite something, I'd say, I'm not trying to cause any trouble. I'm not that kind of a guy. But one day, one of his daughters walks into his office and asks him a question. And he gives her this look like, why are you asking me that? And she goes, Dad, I'm not trying to cause any trouble. I'm not that kind of a girl. So I rubbed off on him.
There you go. There you go. But it's so awesome to have you here. Your new album, Scorched, is absolutely killer. Thanks for continuing to give us excellent thrash that we know and love. For people who haven't heard the full album yet, though, do you feel that the first single, The Surgeon, is a good representation of what this whole record is going to sound like? Or is that just scratching the surface of what's to come?
I mean, that's a great point. It's Surgeon is Overkill 101. It's a formula that we've used for years with regard to writing, arranging, what type of riffs are being chose, what the vocal line is going to be like. And I'm not saying you could find it on the Electric Age, or you could find it on Ironbound or White Devil, or even earlier, because it's an updated version of Overkill 101. But what follows that is a mountain of diversity. We're not a one-trick pony. I don't think we ever have been. If somebody says that about us, they obviously haven't heard the whole record through. But this one, even more so, carries that diversity, those hills and valleys, and not just that one-trick pony thrash show.
Of course. I think when people, listen to Overkill, you need to listen to the entirety of the Overkill catalog, because when we get a track like The Years of Decay, for example, I mean, that shows a completely different side of Overkill than what we would hear off of, an album such as The Electric Age or something as recent as The Wings of War. So
I tend to agree, and I think that is really what keeps it fresh, is that you have so many tools in the shed, but you have to just reinvent those tools and how you use them. There's rock and roll here, there's a groove here, there is a punk element. There is a symphonic element in some cases, or just nuances of such. So I think that with this record specifically, we're touching a lot of bases and ticking a lot of boxes on
it. Did you consider this just picking up where you left off after The Wings of War, or would you say this almost signifies a new beginning for the Overkill endeavor?
It's funny to have a new beginning at my age, but I do think that it's really a result of the pandemic. We had always run our clock. It was 18 months to 24 months, and we would release this all the way from the beginning of our existence. The pandemic threw everybody a curveball in the world. So obviously, through our curveball there was no 22-month release, 18-month release. So it gave us so much more time, and I think it gave us more time to look at ourselves and the record objectively, and that's where those differences come from on this record. I mean, I know maturity is a dirty word, but it's all over this fucking record, and that's kind of a good thing, because I've mentioned it before that I got the demo. It was March of 2020. The pandemic was we were sent home from the road on the 12th of March, but I was holding a new demo then. So it had all been done with regard to riffs and was just going to be rearranged and had parts added. But I wrote it and tore it down and again and again and again. So I think that over that 2-year period of just writing alone in the house kind of a thing, there was a whole new perspective that was uncovered. And that's pretty evident in this record.
Does it ever start off with the preconceived vision? Because you're right, there is such a pun somewhat intended grinding wheel for Overkill to go from, I remember listening to the grinding wheel, got really into it, and before I know it, the Wings of War was coming out, and now we got Scorched coming out. Like, it almost seems like it's like a constant machine going. So does it ever like have a preconceived vision, or do you just kind of go right into it and kind of let things fall into place?
I mean, it's a good question because we do work on that clock, and there's part of the reason of working on that clock is our visibility. I mean, we're quite obviously not the top tier that does this. We're below that. We're like the middle tier. To keep ourselves visible, we found, and working and keeping the other guys working, was to work within that clock. And could that get sterile at times? I think probably it could get sterile at times. I think we still always put as much as we can into those records. But we never sit back and have that vision and think about it. The vision just kind of forms itself as the record takes shape. But I think on this one, and especially from my perspective of the writing, and that would be the melody lines and the vocals and whatever harmonies are added and backgrounds, I'm listening to it going, man, I never did anything like this. I mean, it sounds like me. It's stuff I've tried before, but I've never done all these different things on one record. And I think the only way that could have happened was the time that was afforded me personally and the guys personally to change this record up as it went along.
Well, the last time I actually spoke to you was like during the lockdown, when I was talking with you and Mark for the BPMD album. So did maybe like, and I've seen you play with Metal Allegiance and collaborate with so many people in the metal community. So did maybe like having the BPMD album and all that, does maybe working with different people allow you to open new doors before the making of an Overkill album?
That's a great point. I never really thought about it, but I wanted to keep busy, and I really like Mark Mengy. I mean, I get along with him really well. We're just two ball busting kind of guys, and it's always been about fun for me. But all of a sudden, I'm introduced to Phil Demmel and the talents that he has, and I'm doing more work with Mike Portnoy, who's he's a state of the art type of a drummer. So sure, it opens your eyes to different things, even if they are just covers. It's just, how do you play? How do you reimagine stuff? Where do you fit in? What are the dynamics between the 4 and BPMD or the 5 and Overkill? I think one of the untapped dynamics we have that really came to fruition on this record is Jason. Because, I mean, he came on, he did the Wings of War. Of course he played it great. I mean, Jason's a great drummer. There's no two ways about it. But you can hear it in this, that he was changing parts. He's like, no, I don't like that. I want to do this. I think you guys ought to double that chorus up, or I think that you guys ought to, you ought to go to the bridge right there. We're like, look at Jason doing the songwriting. So working with different people, of course, gives you different perspective on what your results are going to be or what your vision is going to be.
Of course, and not to define anybody by age, but like Jason comes from a different generation of metal as well. A lot of people grow up listening to Overkill. They say they grew up with Feel the Fire or Taking Over or Under the Influence. For me, I grew up with The Art of Balance and Threads of Life from Shadows Fall. So like it almost seems like you're able to kind of bring in many different, not that I would ever predict Overkill becomes a metalcore band, but like I'd imagine that that different type of influence can also bring in some new fuel to the fire.
Well, sure. I mean, right down to the last record. We had worked with Andy Sneap on the grinding wheel, and liked the results we had. It's actually one of my favorite records of this era. This, let's say, last third of our career at this point. But Andy was too busy to do it, and Jason was the first one to say, "Hey, let's go talk to Zeus about this." And we all went, that's not a bad idea. So he obviously has an influence on the band. And, what you're saying, that metalcore kind of stuff, Zeus did the Shadows Fall stuff or something, So, I mean, it was, to us, it just was like, geez, if Jason's going to be comfortable there, we should be uncomfortable there too. Keep our minds open to the whole idea. And I think the results were really good, but I think the results on this are even the next step better.
100%. Couldn't agree more. I would say that no Overkill, like Scorched isn't a continuation of the Wings of War. The Wings of War isn't a continuation of the Grinding Wheel. I just consider every Overkill album to be a continuation of an evolution that has been present since Feel the Fire.
That's a cool thought. I do think that somewhere 2010 was Ironbound, which was, I don't know, it was kind of a revelation for us. I'm not going to say a rebirth, but, everything was, all cylinders were cranking on that. Everything was was moving. Nobody was thinking about it. It just worked. And then I think we fell into, you know, the Father, Son, the Holy Ghost on the Electric Age and White Devil Armory. I think that there was a pattern on those 3 records. I don't think we did it purposely. I think it just came out where those 3 records actually had almost an identity of sisters, brothers, that type of an approach.
I think you have kind of the best of both worlds where, like, I think an Overkill fan is always going to be happy, you know, with the album. It's always going to have the groove and the aggression that we know and love, but you're also going to keep people on their toes, whether it is through a similar sound or a new trick in the book.
Yeah, I mean, but it still has to remain fun. You know, I mean, that's the whole thing. I mean, you get into a band because it's cool, it's fun. You know, I don't know if I told you a story. I mean, I was in Manhattan College, you know, in when we got offered our deal. And you know, when I was a kid, you know, my father broke his back to make sure I went to good schools, you know. I mean, he sent me to a prep school in New Jersey called Don Bosco. I got into Manhattan College. You know, shit was going the way he kind of wanted. And then I got a record deal. You know what I'm saying? I'm like a junior in college, you know, record deal comes. I'm like, Pop, I gotta take this. I said, they don't hold these things for, you know, they don't say, okay, when you're done with college and you have the deal. It's not like the Army.
Yeah. I mean.
So, in any case, he says, you gotta do what you gotta do, but just please try to finish your education. In any case, years later, I ended up taking him to a Mets game for his 75th birthday. Actually, Mike Piazza treated us to the tickets. He gave me his whole luxury box. When
awesome.
they were playing at Shea. And he's sitting there with all his grandchildren and his daughter-in-laws and family. His guys lying around me and my brother. And he goes to me, I knew this Overkill thing would work out. And I said, do you remember when I left college? He said, yeah. He said, you asked me if this was about art or free beer and girls. And I said, I just got to confess to you. It was about art. Not about art. It was about free beer and girls.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
But it came all the way around. That's what my point is, you know. So
I think it's forgivable now.
Tangent, but it's...
No, that's one of the best stories ever. You got great one-liners, and now you got one of my favorite stories. Good job. I do gotta ask this. You have so many albums now. I consider Overkill to be one of the most prolific bands in metal. It has to get harder to put a set list together when you're playing live, right? You're always gonna have those fans who want deep cuts from every single album.
Yeah, I mean, that's... And there's the ones that we always play, you know, and you think to yourself, maybe I ought to get rid of some of those so we could, you know, fill in some more space with stuff that just has never seen the light of day. You know, dust it off from the closet and see if it still works, and, you know, play something from the Years of Decay or something deep from Horoscope, or even I Hear Black, which is a record I endear myself to, you know, the older that record gets. But I think on this record, the main focus is going to be doing it live because of its diversity. If there's a 4 or 5 part element that make up Overkill, there are 4 or 5 or 6 of those type of elements on this record. You know, whether it be the thrashy twist of the wick kind of approach, or whether it be that blues ride that's in Wicked Place, you know, or you know, big choruses like sing-alongs like Going Home. You know, and I think that there's a lot of live potential on Scorched.
Absolutely, 100%. I feel like Scorched is sort of like has like that cinematic journey behind it, where like there is like, you know, I feel like a lot of Overkill albums, and I mean this as a compliment, they're like very shuffle friendly. You could almost maybe start off with a different song every time if you want to revisit it and keep things unpredictable. With Scorched, I feel like that there is like a beginning, there's a climax, there's an end, there's almost kind of like a sort of narration within the music and the vocal style within it as well.
I mean, that's a great perspective, because, you know, when Dee Dee starts with his riff, he mock titles all of the riffs and how the songs are developing. And the song Scorched was mock titled as Opener. And it was just that simple. He's been doing that for years. And then it's bookended by what's called Last One. And the last one was Bag of Bones. So everything else is mock titled in between. Number 6, number 9. You know what I mean? The Thrasher, the Melody. And So to me, I suppose it's somewhere in his, I'm not going to say twisted, but cognitive mind, he's thinking subconsciously that there is a journey by those mock titles, because he sees it a certain way in his mind's eye, that this is the opener and this is the closer, and in between lies the meat, between the bookends.
For the lyrical aspects of Overkill, I've asked you before on the at NAM, you know, like if you needed to hear music before you came up with lyrics, or could lyrics determine it. But when it comes to lyrical subject matter, does it ever come from a personal aspect, or does it come from within, or are you looking very external for sources of inspiration within your lyrical writing?
Well, I do. It's actually, I mean, it's a great pickup. You know, I mean, it's perceptive because I actually do both. I like to see how the external source affects the internal source. And what I mean is what goes on out there, how it affects what goes on up here on a personal level. So if I've always looked at my lyrics as hopes, dreams, and confessions, that kind of a thing. You know, what happened between the last two records, or the last record and this record, that's changed my perception of the world. You know, and when I said earlier I tore this record down, you know, 3 times, it was because it was too dark. You know, I mean, we were all living in a pandemic, and it was reflected in every word I chose. You know, I mean, words are like jewels. You know, if you write lyrics, I mean, you can reuse them. You have to just put them in a different order. You have to make sure sometimes they shine and sometimes they're dull. And each has its beauty, and I love that kind of contrast. But this record got so dark that I had to get rid of that shit. I said, this has nothing to do with me. I said, if this is the way I'm being affected by what's going on the outside, I'm obviously depressed at this point. And then I started going in a straighter line with regard to, you know, what my goal was to get out of this situation we were all in, and I'm referring to the pandemic. So I didn't want it to be reflective of the pandemic, even though I touch on it here and there throughout the record.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that like the lyrics are like kind of reflective in a way, but you know, sometimes inspiration. You know, one of my personal favorite vocalists, Burton C. Bell, who used to sing with Fear Factory, said inspiration is like lightning, and it can be as gone as quick as it comes. So like, you know, you mentioned that you tore down this record and rebuilt it and stuff, but do you find it like, you know, find it almost kind of difficult to put inspiration aside and coming back to it later because it makes it harder to sort of capture that moment in a way?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes inspiration, much like Burton said, is lightning fast. But sometimes it's a build. For me, sometimes I can see where I'm going. I can see the city on the hill. I just need to get to the city on the hill. And I just don't know how to get there. And I have to figure it out. I can always see it in the distance. So do I take this path or do I take that path? Is this more treacherous, or is this the easier path? Or do I need to take the more treacherous path because then my results will be that much more worth it because of the sacrifice that went into it? So I think I have a combination of both.
I'd imagine too, and I wouldn't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but I'd imagine that sometimes the songwriting process could be just as deteriorating as it could be cathartic, right? Because whether it is confronting your own personal demons or, you know, really having to almost kind of poison your mind with the poison in the world around us, like, I'd imagine the songwriting could hurt you just as much as it could enlighten you.
Like many broken pens. Fuck! Because I don't sit on a computer and do it, you know what I mean? I just don't. I mean, I'm sitting there, I'm scratching it out on a yellow legal pad, you know, with you know, underlining words like fuck, or just putting a big star on it, or putting a big thumbs down, so, you know, but saving it so that somewhere later on, maybe it could be used, you know? I always thought it would be good to just give them away to somebody someday to see, like, oh my God, what does this guy go through when he's doing? Like moments of insanity and absolute moments of bliss.
I think those would be artifacts like in Indiana Jones. I'm afraid if I touch it, my face will melt off. So, you know, that could be dangerous right there. I think the lyrics written are just as dangerous as the lyrics when we listen to them.
I think though lyrically, and I've always prided myself on the fact that no matter how dark it can appear, it's really done so to contrast it with what's light. It's not about
Oh,
absolute negativity. The negative is in there to show you what's positive on the other side. You have to be able to have that contrast to be able to really appreciate the lighter side of things, or I mean, shit, you know me. I mean, I have a fucking sense I do this because I have a sense of humor. I mean, I like to laugh. I like to be with people. I don't have hatred in my heart, and I have not had hatred in my heart for a long time. I'm just trying to get through this fucking thing like everybody else, and I have this great opportunity to express myself through these lyrics, whether they be something that is just, radiates positivity, or is the negative thing that I need to confess about myself so I can get to that other side.
of course, of course. I think you do have the best of both worlds with it. And I have two more questions for you. And one of them is sort of like the follow up to sort of like conclude the lyrical aspect, because when you're playing songs, from the grinding wheel, so it feels like we're partying like it's 2017, and then Years of Decay, 1989, right? I think that was years. So like,
Yeah.
so Years of Decay, you're going through multiple spaces in time. So when you're playing these songs live, and you're bringing in different portions, does it almost feel like you're going through multiple spaces in time, and almost feels like you're going through multiple eras? Or when you're bringing it in a live setting, it almost brings new meaning behind it, and it doesn't really feel like you're partying like it's 1989 on Years of Decay?
That's cool. That's a cool take. When it gets to muscle memory, I think I transform into I take the road backwards into 1989, for instance. If I have to think about it, then I'm in the moment. Then I'm in 2023. If I'm doing the grinding wheel, there is no muscle memory in 2017. Or if I'm doing any of the Scorch stuff, there is no muscle memory in 2023. But maybe down the road there will be, like songs like Rotten to the Core from the first record, or Feel the Fire. I mean, I can do these things in my sleep, and when that song comes up, even in the modern era, in my head, I'm back at a club called L'Amour's in Brooklyn, New York. You know what I mean? Or something in Jersey, And it's kind of a cool thing to be able to, I don't know, go into the transporter room and get beamed down to another era.
Yeah, I feel like every Overkill song is almost kind of like a Dolores in a way, where like it's like Back to the Future, and you just go to different time periods in that. And the final question I wanted to ask you is, and not to pigeonhole Overkill by any stretch of the means, but people do like to label Overkill as thrash, and I do see where that comes from. And being that, Overkill originated in the East Coast and not in the Bay Area like a lot of them have in the past, would you say that maybe Overkill, as well as maybe Anthrax as well, had a different experience cutting their teeth at that time period? Was maybe Overkill more affiliated with the hardcore scene than the thrash scene, or something like that? Or like, how would you say the East Coast, was it even maybe its obstacle, that not being in the Bay Area and having that sort of networking ability?
Well, I mean, that was obviously the hot spot out in California, in the Bay. I mean, for this stuff. I mean, some stuff out of Los Angeles too, but I think that the main difference is that they had a sound unto themselves, a scene within a scene almost, and obviously it became the biggest part of it. I mean, that's even just by record sales, it's been the biggest part of it. What's come out of California, and especially the Bay Area. But I think that one of the bigger indicators of it, on how there was a difference, was the hardcore that was on this side of the country. The Agnostic Fronts and the Cro-Mags, which came on around later and later, and the punk. The punk that was on the West Coast was very different than the punk that was on the East Coast. And you have to think that this is pre-social media, pre-internet. If you wanted to see the Dead Boys, you had to go see the Dead Boys. You know what I'm saying? You couldn't just I just feel like hearing the Dead Boys, I'm going to just pull them up on the computer. You can't. You had to get the record. You had to go see them. They had to do the same with the Dead Kennedys. I think that that's a huge part of the difference, is what the punk scenes were like. We both incorporated them within our scenes within the scene, but they were for sure different approaches to what the definition of punk is.
100%, because I don't consider Overkill just a thrash band like Megadeth, or like Megadeth is a straight thrash band. Metallica or Slayer is a straight thrash band. I consider Overkill to be just as much of a hardcore or a punk band as it is as a thrash band, I think. And that's why I thought, like, when I saw you guys play with Life of Agony, that was such a match made in heaven of a bill. You know, it really reflects how Life of Agony is just as much as a metal band as a hardcore band. So I think in the end you had the best of both worlds with Overkill.
Yeah, we had a great scene here. You know, I mean, and there was some pretty serious growing pains, you know, with, you know, those shows that were in Brooklyn and Jersey and New York City at the Ritz, when it would be, you know, Overkill Chromags, Overkill Biohazard, you know, Overkill LOA back in those days. But I think that we had more in common than we had differences.
100%.
You know, there might have been different uniforms that the hardcore guys wore, and our uniform was, you know, the white sneakers and the black motorcycle jacket and tight jeans, and they were wearing Dickies and, you know, and combat boots. You know what I'm saying? It was a different uniform, but there was way more similarity to what the music and the philosophy was, that people eventually realized later on that we were just cousins of each other.
Absolutely. We were all one big dysfunctional family, and whether it was a metal pit or a hardcore pit, scumbags will always die in either pit, so nobody was safe.
I remember walking into a club one day, and I got accosted by a couple of guys in combat boots, like 7 of them. And I was with the drummer at the time. I'm like, get to the door and get so-and-so, right? And one guy goes to the other guy and goes, we can't kick the shit out of him. That's Bobby from Overkill. And the other guy goes, that's more of a reason.
Oh, damn. I don't mean to laugh, but that's pretty fucking hilarious.
Oh man. But that's what I meant by the growing pains. And nothing really happened. It was just, they were idle threats, et cetera, et cetera. But I thought I was going to get my head handed to me. But the point is that we were more the same when we realized that as time went on. There was no reason to war with each other, because we were cousins.
Yep. So. Yep. And Tommy Victor was mixing all of you at CBGB's back in the day. So. So, before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time and for always such a great chat. Just anything else you'd like to promote for the release of Scorch coming out?
No, we're looking forward to hitting States in Europe in April. States should be June and July. We're working on that right now. We're not sure which coast we're going to start on at this point. We're going to feel out there. I mean, it's a different world, but touring's got to happen. So that's really next on the agenda, is to get the touring done.
Hell yeah. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Bobby Blitz of Overkill. Pick up Scorch when it is out. This is Alex from Heavy New York. We will see you next time.
Great to see you, bro.